Oren's hand stopped half an inch from Xavier's wrist. The map chamber held one table, one iron lamp, one wall of painted borders, and one door that had just shut hard enough to rattle the brass latch. Wax dripped down the lamp's stem in a crooked line and cooled in pale ridges. The room always smelled faintly of ink, cold stone, and old glue from repaired maps. Her pulse moved against the skin above her glove, where his fingers almost touched, not quite, suspended between command and question. On the table, the parchment copy of his decree lay open with the 7-year claim ward term underlined in red ink, as if law itself had been scored by a blade. "You challenged me in front of 9 council seats," he said, voice low, jaw tight. "And now you stand here with your chin up as if I cannot seize your lands before sunset." "You can," she answered. "Under the March Charter. Article 4, debt houses in arrears past 3 winters are subject to seizure or guardianship. I copied the charter myself in 843 when my hands still shook from hunger." Her shoulder hit the map cabinet behind her, and a rolled vellum tube rattled in its cubby. "Power isn't your problem. You have too much of it, and today you used it like a warning bell." His breath caught once, almost silent, and then he dragged his hand back and braced both palms on the table instead, shoulders tense under his coat. "My problem," he said, "is a kingdom cracking along its river roads while men like Brant turn shortages into private wars. Your problem is that you made me a punishment to prove a point." She lifted her bare left hand where the old estate ring sat loose from years she had spent eating less than she needed. The silver had worn thin on the inside. She had turned it 3 times that morning to hide the split seam. Oren looked at the ring, then at her mouth, then away. He knew that ring from council sessions, from years of seeing it flash dull against ink stains and ledger dust. There were 2 breaths where either of them could have stepped forward. There were 2 breaths where neither did. Then, from beyond the door, the scrape of claws on stone and a short hound's huff of warning cut through the chamber. Morrow always appeared when she was cornered, as if fear itself carried her scent to him. Oren turned his head toward the sound. "Why is your dog at my private door?" "Because he knows when I'm outnumbered." 3 hours earlier, the throne hall had smelled of cedar smoke, wet wool, lamp oil, and iron polish. Spring rain had darkened the flags on the high windows. Water tracked down the leaded glass in uneven lines. At the center stood the raised dais with its carved ashwood rail, the same rail Xavier had traced with her knuckles while waiting to be called as a copyist for council motions since she was 17. 9 seats curved around the floor in a half ring, each chair back carved with district marks. 7 were occupied when she entered. By the time the bell rang, all 9 held someone in layered court cloth or merchant leather. Xavier Valewood stood at the scribe's lectern with 2 quills, 1 ink cup, sand for drying, and a stack of decree copies tied by blue thread. Her sleeve cuff had been mended with black thread in 3 places where wool had thinned to gauze. Beneath the lectern, Morrow lay curled, 1 white ear torn at the tip, 1 clouded eye turned toward the door, the other half-lidded but watchful. Across from her, Brant Keld arrived late on purpose. He wanted his boots heard, and they were. Iron heels striking stone in a slow rhythm that made 2 counselors look over before he even reached his seat. He wore a coat dyed rust red to match the ore stamp on his wagon guild seal. A signet the size of a plum flashed on his right hand when he sat, and he made certain to set that hand on the armrest where everyone could see it. King Oren Vale entered last. No herald shouted his titles. The hall did not need shouting to identify authority. The room changed shape around him anyway. He crossed the center aisle, set 1 folded vellum on the dais table, and remained standing while the chamber rose and then sat in sequence like a machine obeying a familiar gear. Rain tapped the window panes as he broke the wax seal. "Spring Council right, year 846, he said. By Crown duty under the March Charter and levy law, all debt-bound houses with obligations unpaid beyond 3 consecutive winter tallies will enter claim ward guardianship. Term, 7 years. Refusal, immediate land seizure. Xavier wrote every clause in quick, clean script, each stroke small to save paper space. 7 years. Seizure. She wrote those words once, then copied them onto a second sheet for posting at the west gate. Her thumb left a crescent of ink near the edge where it trembled. Oren continued, "Guardianship shall place estate management and harvest rights under approved protectors. Existing debts remain binding until paid in full. Appointed guardians may petition for labor and residency compliance from debt house members as needed for security." She looked up sharply. In full meant her family's number, fixed in the levy ledger like a nail, 1,800 silver marks. And residency compliance, in hall language, meant a body could be moved and held while everyone pretended the order was about harvest logistics. Brant leaned back with one ankle on his knee and smiled without warmth. "A practical decree," he said to the room, not to Oren. "The roads are unsafe. Border estates need stronger hands." Xavier did not wait for recognition. "Your decree allows a creditor to become a guardian over the person and lands of the debtor house," she said, voice clear across the hall. "It allows coercion under legal dress." 9 heads turned toward her lectern. One counselor muttered, "Scribe speaks out of order." But no one stopped her. A second counselor reached for his copy and started scanning line by line as if hoping she had misread. Oren's gaze fixed on her. "State your objection properly." She lifted one copy of the decree and tapped line 6 with the quill butt hard enough to leave a dot. "Guardianship by claim does not distinguish between a ward who consents and one compelled by seizure threat. The text gives no refusal path except dispossession. There is no independent witness requirement. There is no appeal period." Brant laughed once, short and sharp. "You lecture on consent while owing 1,800 marks you cannot pay in 3 lifetimes?" Morrow lifted his head and gave a low rumble. Brant looked down at the dog and then at Xavier with open contempt. "You are unclaimable in one sense and very claimable in another. No heir, no patron, a broken border house with 1 hound and a ring that doesn't fit." Heat climbed her throat and made the back of her neck burn. 2 counselors stared at their hands as if wood grain had suddenly become important. One old woman in seat 5 met Xavier's eyes and then looked away, unwilling to intervene with Brant watching. Oren said nothing for 4 heartbeats that felt like 4 steps toward a cliff. Xavier forced her voice steady. "Mockery is not a legal argument." "Neither is your pride," Brant said. "Take a guardian, girl, and be grateful. Better to be managed than seized." She could hear someone in seat 2 inhale sharply at his tone, but nobody interrupted him. The chamber had watched men ruin each other by decree before. It had watched women traded in marriage compacts framed as tax relief. It knew exactly what humiliation looked like when dressed as civic order. No raised hand, no shouted insult needed, only a room full of witnesses letting a person shrink in place while procedure marched forward. Xavier could feel the shape of that silence as if it pressed against her ribs. Oren lifted one hand at last. "Enough." The word landed flat, controlled. "Adjourned for 1 hour." Chairs scraped. Murmurs started at once. Brant stood, still smiling, as if he had won a game and could afford patience. Xavier gathered loose papers with fingers gone numb. She expected a guard to collect her for reprimand. Instead, Oren stepped down from the dais himself and stopped at her lectern. "Map chamber," he said quietly. "Now." Morrow rose first and pressed against Xavier's knee as they crossed the side corridor. His fur brushed damp wool, his shoulder carried more weight than his size suggested. The map chamber door shut, and the hall noise dropped to a muffled blur. Oren did not sit. He paced once along the wall map where old campaign pins marked uprisings in black, famine aid routes in green, river toll posts in blue. One black pin sat over the border district that had been her home. "You embarrassed a council witness in ritual session," he said. Brant embarrassed himself. "You accused me of codifying coercion. I accused you of writing a law that gives men like him a clean blade and then calling it administration." Oren stopped pacing and gripped the table edge. "Do you think I wrote this for sport?" "No." She moved to the opposite side of the table, matching his line of sight. "I think you wrote it because you are terrified the border houses will splinter if harvest convoys keep vanishing." That landed. His mouth tightened. He did not deny it. She pointed to the green aid routes on the map. "In 842, famine winter took my parents in 6 weeks. Barley failed, then rye failed. We burned chair legs when coal ran out. When levy collectors came, there was nothing left but stamped debt. Your crown books entered us for 1,800 marks before the thaw." His eyes lifted from the map to her face. She kept going before fear could close her throat. "I came to the capital in 843 and trained as a council scribe because copying law was the only work that fed me daily. I know your clauses because I inked them. I know the loopholes because I watched who steps through them. I know which phrases sound neutral and end with someone confined to a house not their own. If you pass 7 years of claim ward as written, Brant or someone like him takes my land by law and calls it protection." Rain thickened against the windows. Oren dragged a hand across his mouth and looked tired for the first time that day. Not royal, not untouchable, just a man who had slept little and trusted less. "4 granaries were burned last month," he said. 2 bridge toll houses were looted. I have district petitions asking for armed escorts I cannot spare. If I do not produce a framework by spring right, each district lord improvises force. That ends in civil fracture. I can't hold a realm with petitions and good intentions. You can't hold it by turning debtors into leverage for merchants either." His gaze hardened. "You think I don't see what Brant is?" "I do. I also see that if I move without legal frame, 3 seats call me tyrant and 2 river districts stop remitting grain." She circled the table one step, not backing off, refusing the safer distance. "Then write a frame that blocks him from swallowing houses whole. You had choices in wording, and you chose the one that lets him stand in that hall and call me claimable." He gave a harsh breath that might have been a laugh if it held any humor. "You think I enjoyed that hall? I think you let it happen because you wanted compliance and believed I would fold if I was made small enough. I wanted order. And I want law that can survive contact with people like him." Neither stepped back. The lamp flame between them bent in a draft from the door seam. Her sleeve had ridden up from her wrist as she argued. Oren noticed the bruised yellow scar there from old rope burn, years old, faint but visible. His right hand lifted, slow, uncertain, as if drawn by a thought he had no right to have. He stopped with his fingers hovering above that scar. Xavier didn't move. "I could issue seizure by dusk," he said, voice lower now, roughened. "No council vote needed. 1 seal. I know. I could assign you to a guardian without hearing another word." "I know that too." His hand remained suspended, then closed into a fist and dropped to his side. The restraint in that movement struck her harder than if he had touched her. The space between power and permission narrowed until she felt it as a physical thing. Her skin prickled where his fingers had almost landed, and anger braided with something hotter that she had spent 2 years pretending not to name. She swallowed. "Don't make law out of fear and call it necessity. Don't provoke men who would destroy you to spite me. I am not provoking them. I am refusing to disappear politely." Morrow scratched once at the door, nails ticking wood. Oren glanced toward the sound, then back to her. "Why did you come to the right knowing Brant would be there?" he asked. "Because I had to hear you say it yourself. I needed to know if you believed in that decree, or only in what you thought it could prevent. And now? And now I still want. She stopped, jaw clenching. The word felt dangerous in her mouth for reasons that had nothing to do with charters. She started again, forcing honesty through anger. I still want you to be better than this decree. I want you to choose a different line. Oren stared at her as if she had placed a blade in his hand and asked him not to use it. That is not all you want. Her breath hitched once. No. He took one step around the map table. She did not retreat. He was close enough now that she could see where a seam in his black council coat had loosened at the shoulder, stitched in haste with darker thread. Not untouchable. Not invulnerable. His voice dropped until it barely carried. Say it plainly. I want you, she said, the words clipped, angry, true. I have wanted you through 2 winters of copying your orders and watching you cut yourself into rules, because feeling anything looks like weakness in that hall. I have wanted you every time you argued over grain tariffs until midnight and forgot to eat. I have wanted you and hated what that wanting could cost me. Something broke across his face. Not control, not exactly, but the mask he wore for the council. I want you too, he said. Not as debt settlement, not as award, not as obligation, not as something I can claim because ink says I may. He reached for her again. This time his fingers brushed the inside of her wrist. A light contact, warm and deliberate. Her pulse jumped hard under his thumb. She closed her eyes for one breath and then opened them to find him watching her with the concentration of a man near a cliff edge. Heat moved through her in a bright, almost disorienting line, from wrist to throat to spine. She knew he felt it too. His chest rose once, shallow, then steadied by force. His hand slid no farther. He held that single point of contact like a question he did not trust himself to answer without her. If I keep going, he said, there is no version of this where anyone calls it simple. If you keep going under this decree, she replied, there is no version where anyone calls it free. He let go at once. The loss of touch made the room feel colder, and she hated the cold because it proved how badly she had wanted the heat. You think I would compel you? He said. I think this law would make even consent look like surrender in every witness account that follows. He nodded once, abrupt. Then we don't cross that line while this stands. Do you mean that? Yes. She exhaled, shaky but relieved, then irritated at her own relief. Good. Because if you touched me now and called it destiny, I would bite you hard enough to scar. A surprised, real smile tugged at one corner of his mouth before it vanished. Noted. The moment could have tipped again, but a heavy knock struck the door. Morrow's growl rolled deep and immediate, vibrating through the lower panels. Your Majesty? A male voice called from outside. Brant. Council cannot sit idle. We should resume without this distraction. Morrow barked once, sharp. Oren did not move toward the door. Wait outside. Respectfully, sire, private consultations with debtors create appearances. Morrow slammed against the lower panels with his shoulder. A snarl followed, low and committed, the sound of a dog who would take a hand to the bone and not release until dragged off. Xavier stepped to the door and placed one palm against it. Morrow, stay. The growl reduced, but did not disappear. Oren looked at her. He guards you. He remembers men who cornered me when I was 16 and called it bargaining. Oren's jaw locked. Who? Dead now from fever and bad luck. The names don't matter. The habit does. They matter to me. She shook her head once. What matters is this. The decree changes or I oppose it again in open session. If you seize Valewood, I will read the charter against you from the floor until they drag me out by my boots. And if they gag me, Tamsin will read it. Bold threat from someone with one ally and a hostile council. She met his gaze. I have 2 allies. Tamsin is in the archives now pulling levy gate logs. If she finds what we suspected, fraud diversions on war wagons, Brant's case for emergency guardianship collapses. He frowned. You said suspected. I said probable. 14 wagons vanished from border tallies over 3 years, always routed through iron checkpoints with his contracting seal. I copied the outbound counts myself during winter audits, then copied the receiving tallies. The numbers never aligned. Oren straightened, attention sharpening into command. Why wasn't this brought sooner? Because every clerk who raised it lost a post, and I wanted proof, not rumor. I wanted records that survive cross-examination. Another knock, louder. Brant again, impatience edging each syllable. Your Majesty, the room is waiting. Oren stepped close enough that only she could hear. If your friend brings me proof, I can revise on grounds of corrupted levy administration and prevent seizure under emergency rewrite. I can suspend implementation before sunset. If she doesn't, then I still won't force you. She studied him for signs of evasion and found none, only strain and intent. He added, I asked for this private meeting because I wanted to hear if there was any path where you and I were not standing on opposite sides of a statute. There is, she said. Write it as chosen compact, no compulsory ward bonds, independent signatory witness for debt houses, annual review so no one buries abuse for 7 years. His brows lifted. You drafted that already. In my head during your speech? Yes. The corner of his mouth moved again, this time in tired admiration. Of course you did. Morrow barked twice, then went abruptly quiet. Footsteps approached at speed in the corridor, lighter, quick, familiar. A fist struck the door in a different rhythm, 3 rapid knocks and 1 pause. Tamsin, Xavier said. Oren opened the door himself. Tamsin Reed stood there drenched to the elbows, hair escaping her braid, 2 ledger books hugged against her chest under oilcloth. Ink stains marked 3 fingers on her left hand. She took one look at Oren and dropped into a brief bow without lowering her eyes. I have the gate logs and levy duplicates, she said, and I need to speak before Brant hears a word. Brant was 3 paces down the corridor with 2 council witnesses behind him. He tried to step forward. Morrow moved between, hackles raised, one blind eye milky and unblinking, the other fixed with intent. Brant halted with a muttered curse and held his coat hem away from the dog's teeth. Oren gestured Tamsin inside and shut the door again, sliding the bolt this time. The click sounded final. The archive books landed on the map table with a thud heavy enough to jolt the ink cup. Tamsin stripped the oilcloth and flipped the first ledger open to a page tagged by red thread, then a second tag, then a third. Outbound war levy wagons, autumn and winter routes, years 843 through 845, she said, voice clipped from hurry. Total declared through Brant's iron checkpoints, 62. Total received at East Garrisons per gate logs, 48. Missing, 14. She turned pages with practiced speed, aligning column numbers by touch. Here, wagon marks 11 through 14 in 843, then 3, 7, 9, and 12 in 844, then 6 more in 845. Every discrepancy touches contracts linked to his merchant's consortium. I cross-checked against axle inspection marks because those are logged by different hands. Xavier pointed to a side margin she recognized. That note is mine. Tamsin nodded. You flagged a seal mismatch on wagon 9, 844. I traced the duplicate wax to a copying die held in Brant's counting house inventory list. That list was filed under tool tax exemptions. He never expected anyone to compare it to levy records. Oren's expression changed from strain to cold focus. Can this stand in council immediately? Tamsin tapped the second book. Gate master logs carry 3 independent marks each: toll stamp, axle check, and night bell tally. They match across 2 gatehouses. I also brought the levy ledger proving Valewood debt status, because he will claim personal grievance taints her testimony. Read the debt line now, Orrin said. Tamsin opened to the Crown debt page and read, Valewood Estate. Entry winter 842. Crown debt assessed 1,800 silver marks. Status outstanding. She shut it with care. Debt exists. Fraud also exists. Both can be true in the same record set. Xavier let out a breath she had been holding since dawn. The room seemed to tilt back into level. Orrin rolled his shoulders once, as if setting armor in place. Then we go back in. Brant's voice carried through the door, sharpened by impatience. Sire, if this takes any longer, we lose the room. Orrin looked at Xavier. Do you still intend to stand against me publicly if needed? Yes. Good. He faced Tamsin. You will testify to numbers only, no speculation. I prefer numbers, she said. They hold steady when people don't. He gave a brief nod. Stay close. They returned through the side corridor in a line. Orrin first, then Xavier with Morrow tight at her calf, then Tamsin holding both ledgers like shields. The hall noise dropped when they entered. All 9 seats were occupied again. Counselors bent toward one another in naughty whispers. Brant stood near seat 3 with a look that shifted from confidence to calculation when he saw the books. Orrin took the dais. Session resumed, he said. Before further decree, this council will hear witness on levy fraud. Brant spread his hands. On whose accusation? On mine, Xavier said from the lectern. His laugh came quick, brittle. A debtor scribe attempts reprisal after being corrected. Tamsin stepped forward. I will read the logs. Brant snapped. You are archive staff, not counsel. Archive staff maintain the records this council relies on, Tamsin replied. Orrin lifted one hand. Witness will proceed. Tamsin read each missing wagon mark, year, and route aloud. She named the total, 14, then turned the book so the nearest counselors could inspect the 3 stamp verification lines. Xavier followed by reading her own copied gate tallies from winter audits, matching each discrepancy. She kept her voice level even when Brant interrupted twice to accuse fabrication. Forgery, Brant said, pointing at the margin notes. Anyone can write numbers in old books. Scribes are paid to write whatever their patron wants. Tamsin answered without blinking. The ink oxidation on those entries predates this month by years. I can call the archive conservator if you want that testified. Also, your own contracting seal appears on 11 of 14 diverted routes. I brought wax impressions. One counselor in seat 6 leaned forward. Show me the seal impressions. She did. Seat 6's mouth tightened. Seat 4 requested the gate bell logs and traced 2 lines with his own finger, lips moving as he counted. Seat 5 asked for the dates to be repeated. Tamsin repeated every date. Brant turned to Orrin. Sire, this is political theater. We face unrest. We need decisive guardianship, not clerks with grudges and dogs at doors. Orrin's reply cracked like a struck board. Do not lecture me on unrest while siphoning war levies. Murmurs spread across the seats, first low, then louder. One counselor asked for immediate freeze on Brant's transit licenses. Another asked whether missing wagons correlated with districts that later petitioned for emergency grain. Brant's confidence thinned visibly. Sweat shone at his temple. Xavier stepped away from the lectern and stood in the open floor where Brant could not pretend she was a mere pen hand. You called me unclaimable, she said. You were right about one thing. I will not be claimed by a man who steals from hungry districts and calls it stewardship. Brant sneered. You stand because the king indulges you. She held his gaze. No, I stand because the language can be rewritten in the same room where it was used against me, and because the record survived long enough to speak. Oren looked from Brant to Xavier, then out across all 9 seats. The decree as drafted is suspended. A burst of overlapping voices followed. On what authority? Immediate suspension? What replaces it? He waited until the noise dropped enough to hear single words. New language, he said. Debt houses may enter elective compact terms. No compulsory claim ward bonds. No land seizure triggered solely by refusal of personal guardianship. Estate debt remains enforceable by audited payment schedules. Independent signatory witness required for each compact. Council review every spring. He turned toward Xavier. Draft witness for this language will stand beside the crown as signatory voice. Brant barked a disbelieving laugh. A debtor? You elevate her above titled houses? Oren answered without looking at him. I elevate competence above predation and bribed shortages. Brant stepped into the center aisle, red-faced. This is madness. You would bind policy to a woman who admitted desire for you in private. The hall froze. Even rain seemed to pause against the panes. Xavier's spine went rigid. Tamsin's head snapped toward Brant. Morrow rose, muscles coiling under white fur. Oren descended 1 step from the dais, eyes hard. Choose your next words carefully. Brant grinned, ugly and triumphant. You think walls keep secrets? Servants listen. Doors carry voices. Shall I repeat what I heard outside your map chamber? Xavier tasted copper where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. She could retreat, deny, shrink. She did none of those. Repeat this instead, she said, loud enough for the back wall. He did not touch me beyond my wrist. He did not compel me. He halted because law made choice impossible, and he knows the difference. If you want scandal, you'll be disappointed by restraint. A counselor in seat 7 whispered, By all saints, under his breath. Oren held Xavier's gaze, then addressed the room. Yes, I halted. His voice steadied the chamber by force. And I will continue to halt until any bond between us can be chosen without legal leverage, without debt pressure, and without this council pretending otherwise. He faced Brant fully now. You will acknowledge the revised governance terms and submit your seal records for immediate inquiry. Brant spat on the floor beside the aisle. I acknowledge nothing. Morrow lunged 1 pace with a bark that shook the air. Brant stumbled back and nearly lost his footing on the wet stone. Oren did not raise his voice. You sit in this council by crown sufferance, not inheritance. Refuse formal acknowledgement and you forfeit witness rank before these 9 seats. Refuse record surrender and you answer to levy theft charges by dusk. Brant looked around for support and found none. Seat 5 stared at him with open disdain. Seat 2 would not meet his eyes. Seat 8 nodded once to Oren as if to mark decision made. Brant swallowed. State the terms. Say them, Oren said. Brant's jaw worked. Claim ward compulsion revoked. Elective compact required. Independent signatory witness. And the witness? Brant's gaze slid to Xavier, hatred bright and helpless. Xavier will serve as signatory voice. Formally, Oren said. Brant clenched both fists. Xavier Valewood will serve as signatory voice beside the crown. The words rang through the same hall where he had called her unclaimable. Oren returned to the dais and motioned Xavier up the steps. She climbed without haste, 1 hand grazing the carved ashwood rail she had once touched only from below, while waiting to copy motions she did not shape. Morrow followed and settled at the base of the top step, chest against stone, head on pause, 1 eye on the room. Tamsin moved to the witness table at the side, dripping rainwater onto the flagstones in a dark crescent. Ledger closed now, but her palm still resting on it. Her face held no smile, only fierce concentration and a relief so sharp it looked like pain. Oren spoke so every seat could hear. This revision does not erase debt. It does not erase famine losses. It does not erase misuse of office already done. It sets a boundary for what this crown will and will not enforce. Tax and estate obligations remain. Personal bonds are not to be extracted by threat of seizure. He turned slightly toward Xavier. Signatory voice, confirm language. She read from the amended sheet he had drafted in quick strokes while counsel argued. Elective compacts must include explicit consent from debt house representative, witnessed by independent signatory. Refusal of personal bond cannot trigger automatic seizure. Payment schedules subject to audit each spring council. Any guardian petition affecting residency requires separate review and documented assent. She lifted her head. Confirmed. Orrin added. First audit inquiry opens today into 14 diverted levy wagons. Archive and gatehouse records are entered into council file under seal. Brant flinched at the number like it physically struck him. The old woman in seat 5 rose with effort and bowed her head toward Xavier. I vote adoption. Seat 2 followed, then seat 7, then seat 4, after a visible pause. By the end, all 9 had stood. Some eager, some grudging, none willing to stand with Brant against documents, testimony, and the king's open stance. Tamsin exhaled through her teeth and finally let herself smile. The chamber clerk rang the brass bell 3 times to mark passage. After the vote, courtiers and witnesses moved in clusters, whispering hard into sleeves. Brant remained at the edge of the aisle as if nails pinned his boots. He did not approach Xavier again. 2 guards, unnamed and expressionless, took positions within arm's reach of him when Orrin gave a slight nod. One held out a leather docket for Brant's seal surrender. Brant ignored it until the guard held it closer. Xavier stepped down 1 level from the dais to where Orrin stood half-turned toward her, posture still formal for the room. She could feel 30 eyes pretending not to watch. He spoke just above a whisper. I meant what I said. So did I. Not here, he said. Not under pressure. She agreed. He gave 1 small nod, almost invisible. When there is no decree between us. Tamsin appeared at Xavier's elbow and pressed a dry cloth into her hand. You are bleeding, she murmured. Xavier touched her mouth and found a thin red line where she had bitten her cheek during Brant's outburst. Minor. Tamsin's eyes cut to Orrin. Minor injuries add up when people keep pretending they're incidental. Orrin answered before Xavier could. I know. Tamsin held his gaze for 1 beat, then turned back to Xavier. I'll stay through close. You shouldn't walk the south corridor alone tonight. Half the servants are Brant's cousins by marriage, and I don't trust tongues that move that fast. Xavier squeezed her friend's wrist once in thanks. The hall emptied in layers. First the district aides with armfuls of papers, then the petitioners, then 2 counselors still arguing quietly about grain allotments, as if none of this had happened. One by one, the 9 seats stood vacant again. Rain eased outside, droplets sliding down glass instead of hammering it. Servants relit 2 wall lamps near the side exits and opened a narrow transom for air. The room smelled of extinguished wick and damp stone. Brant was escorted out last. As he passed the dais, he paused and looked up at Xavier with a crooked mouth, full of threat deferred. She met his stare without blinking. Morrow lifted his head and showed teeth just enough to make the point. Brant moved on. When only the 4 of them remained, Xavier, Orrin, Tamsin, and Morrow, the throne hall felt larger, stripped of performative noise. Orrin removed his council chain and set it on the dais table, metal links clinking softly like small struck bells. He rolled his neck once, winced, and then looked at them without the throne hall mask. I owe both of you apology, he said, looking at Xavier and then Tamsin. For letting that right become spectacle. For waiting until public damage before correcting language I should have challenged in draft. Tamsin answered first. Then don't let it happen again. Read your own clauses as if someone you care about could be trapped in each one. I won't. Xavier stepped closer, close enough to see the fatigue at the corners of his eyes and the indentation where the council chain had pressed his collar. Today you chose correction in public. That matters. The room saw it. He gave a tired, rueful tilt of his head. You forced it. You invited it when you summoned me instead of silencing me. You could have sent guards. He accepted that with a breath and a faint nod. I considered it for 6 seconds. Then I remembered you would still find a way to speak from the floor. Accurate, Tamsin said. Morrow rose, circled once, then lay down directly at Xavier's feet on the top step of the dais, muzzle against her boot. The dog's body finally loosened, guard posture easing now that doors were closed and threats moved beyond scent range. Tamsin gathered the ledgers and tucked them under one arm. I am going to eat half a loaf and sleep for 10 hours if no one sets a fire in the archives. Take 12, Xavier said. Impossible. Records don't keep themselves, and tomorrow every nervous official in this palace will want to borrow a page and return it with cleaner margins. Oren looked toward the dark side corridor where the map chamber lay. Tomorrow, we begin audit hearings. Brandt's route contracts freeze tonight. I'll assign 2 neutral clerks to chain of custody. Tamsin gave a crooked smile. Tomorrow you begin listening when scribes tell you something stinks, before it reaches the dais. He accepted that too. Tomorrow, then. She left through the west door, boots squeaking on damp stone, shoulders finally dropping an inch as the door shut behind her. Silence did not settle this time like a threat. It settled like space finally available for breath. Oren and Xavier stood side by side at the dais rail, looking out at the empty 9 seats where the day had nearly broken them both. Somewhere in the rafters, water dripped once into a bucket and then stopped. He held out his hand, palm up, not touching. Chosen, he said. She looked at the hand, then at his face, then placed her fingers in his with deliberate care. His grip closed gently, nothing forced, nothing assumed. Chosen, she answered. No decree spoke for them. No clause compelled the contact. No witness demanded performance. Morrow sighed, a long canine exhale, and thumped his tail once against the wood step, as if approving terms. Outside, rain stopped entirely. The last drip from the window eave struck stone, and then did not come again.